Good evening, everybody. We're so happy you are joining us. We're going to begin in just a couple of minutes with our conversation with the incredible Alice Hoffman and her new book, The Book of Magic, one of four in a series that we've all been waiting for. If you have any questions for Alice, if you look on the bottom of your screen, as you see right now, go to the Q&A section, not the chat, the Q&A, and we will make sure to try to get to all of your questions for Ms. Hoffman. So sit back, get comfortable. We'll be ready to go in just a couple of minutes. Good evening, everybody, and welcome. I'm Holly Furfer, your host for this very special book festival in your living room. So on behalf of the Marcus JCC of Atlanta, the National JCC Literary Consortium, and our wonderful partner bookseller this evening, Books and Books Miami, I'm so happy that you've joined us tonight. We're going to be talking to the incredible Ms. Alice Hoffman about her new book, one we've been waiting for, The Book of Magic. And boy, this does not disappoint. We're going to talk about this is the fourth in the Practical Magic series. And now, if you haven't gotten your copy yet, just go ahead and check your JCC's website for your independent bookseller, or you can also get it from the incredible Books and Books in Miami. Excuse me. So I know that you're going to have a lot of questions. So if you look at the bottom of your screen, there's little icons. Go to the Q&A section and put your questions there. We're not going to really check the chat section, so try to get it in the Q&A section. So, and I will try to get to every single question we can. We have a lot to ask her about. She is so prolific. I hope we can get through it all. So let's not waste any more time, and let me give you a little bit about our very esteemed writer. Alice Hoffman is the author of more than 30 works of fiction, including Magic Lessons, The World That We Knew, Practical Magic, The Rules of Magic, and Oprah's book club selection, Here on Earth. And might I add, one of my favorite books of all time, The Dove Keepers. She lives near Boston, but she is now with us all on our virtual stage. So please help me welcome Ms. Alice Hoffman.
Hi.
Hello,
How are
welcome.
you?
How are you?
Good, thank you. It's good to be here.
Great. Well, it's so great to have you here. All right, let's just get right to the meat of this. For those who haven't had a chance to read it, tell us about the Book of Magic. It's the fourth in the series that we all are just addicted to.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, I wrote this book, Practical Magic, 25 years ago,
Wow.
and I never thought I'd go back to it or have anything more to do with it. But in the last couple of years, I've written sequels and prequels, and this, The Book of Magic, is the fourth book and the last book, kind of like a way of saying goodbye to the characters that I've been with for more than 25 years.
Wow. So tell us where the story takes place and who we see in it, who revisits us.
Yeah. Well, the Practical Magic was about two sisters, Sally and Jillian, who were completely different from one another. And they had two elderly aunts, or aunts, depending on how you say it.
Where you're from.
Right? Franny and Jet. And then I wrote a book called Rules of Magic, which was about Franny and Jet and their brother Vincent. Then I went back in time to the original Owens ancestor, Maria Owens, in the 17th century. And now in the Book of Magic, they're all together. They live in Essex County, Massachusetts, but the story really began for them in Essex, England. And they have to go back to the original Essex, well, to try to break a curse because their family is cursed in love.
It's amazing that these characters, we're so attached to these characters. First of all, saying that this is the last and final book, having been with them for 25 years, how is it difficult to let go of them? Do they stay with you? Is this something that maybe you won't let go of them? Maybe we'll see the book of Kylie or the book of somebody else.
I really felt like it was finished, but I really missed them. And I wanted to have closure. So I feel like it is closure with this group of characters, but whether or not some other characters, some more minor character might surface at some point, I don't know. I can't control them. They're
I love
uncontrollable.
it. I love it. That's perfect. It gives us hope. How did you come up with the idea of practical magic in the first place? And then at what point did you say, there's more to this story? I need to go back and forward and move around and tell the complete story.
Well, I really well, I think the reason I came up with it is because I was very influenced by what I read as a child. And I think everybody is. And I read magic. I read fairy tales, folk tales. And then my Russian grandmother would tell me stories about her life, which to me sounded like fairy tales. She lived by a river. She had to go down there every morning and get the water, and the wolves were waiting for her. I mean, it just felt like my grandmother came from this fairy tale world called Russia. And so I think that really influenced me in terms of magic. And so I wrote Practical Magic, and I kept getting mail and emails. First, it started as letters and then became email from readers who wanted more, and they felt like the story wasn't finished. And as I read these, I kind of started to feel like, I think they're right. I think the story's not finished. And one of the things I wanted to do with the first book was not go forward in time, but go backward in time, because I always feel like we can't know our older relatives, and our younger relatives can't know us because they don't know how we were when we were young.
Mm.
And so I wanted to show how these older relatives were when they were young in the 60s in New York City, in Greenwich Village, which is my favorite time period, favorite place. And so I started to write about those characters again.
And for those of us who have read everyone as they came out, now if you have a new reader, because there's new generations that are discovering these books, do you prefer that they read it in the order that you wrote them? Or would it be better to go back and read number three, then number one, then number two, then number four?
I actually think if you can do it anyway, it doesn't really matter. You could start with Practical Magic, but I think if I was doing it, I think I would start with Magic Lessons, which starts in the 17th century, which really kind of starts the whole family and explains the curse. This woman, Maria Owens, falls in love with the wrong man, and to protect her family, she puts a curse on anyone who falls in love with an Owens woman or man, as it turns out. And she thinks she's protecting them, but really, she's setting down a curse that they have to break hundreds of years later.
And so this is how this is the crux of this book. So tell us a little
Yeah,
bit more about the details, because this is that search.
it's a search. And you know what I realized? I think it's the curse isn't like a curse per se. I mean, it is in the book, but I feel like we all have family issues. We all have legacies, from grandparents and great parents, sometimes from people that we never have met. The kind of idea of the ghosts in the nursery, that our family, our heritage influences us. And, we have to try to break certain things, break certain traditions and certain, traumas that have happened, not to us even, but to our grandparents or great grandparents. And that's what happens in the Book of Magic, is that, the family kind of comes together to go backward not in time, but backward to the origin of their family and try to break this curse.
And I know we're probably not giving anything away, but at the very beginning, we learned something that's really difficult for those of us who love these women.
Yes.
Um, and tell us a little bit about that, because it's very realistic. People don't live forever, and people, their
Yeah.
legacies do, but they don't.
It's, I don't think it is giving anything away. And it really, it kind of shocked me And can I just read the first paragraph of the book?
Please, please.
That's really what you're talking about. And it's
Yes,
kind of, once you know this, you know where the book is going.
please.
So it starts, some stories begin at the beginning and others begin at the end, but all of the best stories begin in a library. It was there that Jet Owens saw her fate in a mirror behind the reference desk. Even in her 80s, Jet was still beautiful. Each day she washed with the black soap the family prepared in March. Jake had no aches or pains and had never been ill a day in her life, but fate is fate, and it can often be what you least expect it to be. On this day, when the daffodils had begun to bloom, Jet saw that she had 7 days to live.
Mm,
So it
like
starts.
right there. And
Right
you're just like,
there.
wait,
Bam.
we can't lose her. We love her. But and why did you start it in a library? And I noticed that in the book you drop a lot of references to great books throughout, and it's a book about literature in a lot of ways too.
Yeah, it truly is. It's the book of magic, and it's really about kind of how libraries changed my life. And a lot of the books that are mentioned within this novel, there's a list at the back. They're the books that really influenced me at different periods in my life, really hugely. And the books that I mean, I love other books also, but these books really mean so much to me. So I listed them all in case people were interested in finding them. But, I just feel I went to the library all the time when I was growing up. And I think I don't even know who I would be if I hadn't done that, because it opened the world to me in such a huge way. And I think I still feel that, when kids go to a library and they have the choice to read whatever they want to, it just opens the world in such an incredible way. So in a way, this is my homage, to all the librarians and the libraries that were so important to me growing up.
And you write about magic, and libraries in some ways also are very magical because they open up worlds that we've maybe never thought of or never seen. Was that purposeful?
Yeah, definitely. I feel like, for me in my life, books are magic. Books are what opened everything for me. I can't even really think about what my life would have been like if I hadn't become a reader, because I knew that there were other possibilities, outside of, my very small and very unhappy world. So for me, it was the magic, and it was the magic of escape also,
Yeah.
and of seeing, what your imagination can do. I mean, I still think it's so incredible that, you write a book and you send it out into the world, but really then it belongs to the reader and it becomes the reader's, because you as the reader are imagining everything that's happening.
And your characters, you always have this strong female characters, and in this series, there's such a bond between these women, and not just a sisterhood of literal sisters, but really that relationship and friendship. But you bring back a character who's not a woman, Vincent, and he is such he you just fall in love with him, uh, right? Yeah, exactly. So,
Yes, I think so. It's funny because when I wrote The Rules of Magic, that was the second book that takes place in the 60s in New York. It was about Franny and Jet, the two aunts, and when they were young. And all of a sudden they had a brother, Vincent. And I didn't expect that. I didn't plan that. It wasn't in my outline. He just kind of walked through the door and I just fell in love with him. And which I think a lot of people do. And he comes back in this book, The Book of Magic, because I felt like people really wanted more of him and missed him. And he, in The Rules of Magic, I don't want to give a spoiler, but he kind of disappears at some point. And, sometimes when you're writing, it's a struggle. And sometimes, and I don't know why this is, and sometimes you just have this gift where the book just comes to you and the characters just walk in fully formed. They are who they are. And, that has happened to me with these magic books every time. So I feel really, really lucky, really fortunate.
when you say they surprise you, I mean, do you work with an outline? Do you have an idea like I'm going from here to here to here? This is how it starts, this is how it ends.
Yes.
But things just like how does that happen? Just you just feel it like no, something's needed here.
Exactly what you said. I start with an outline and I usually have these poster boards with post-it notes and different color magic markers. And I plan the whole thing. And I think I know chapter by chapter what's happening. And then it all changes. And I think that's because the characters kind of come to life. and they do what they're meant to do, and you can't kind of control them. That's when I think the book is really living and alive, when those sort of things happen. And I always feel, as a reader, when I'm reading, as I turn the pages, I want to be surprised. That's why I'm turning the pages. I want to know what happens next. And I feel like as a writer, it's kind of the same thing for me. I want to know what happens next. I think I know, but I don't really know.
I love that. And going back to the first paragraph, and we talk about Jet, and we know that she has 7 days to live.
Yeah.
How did you approach this? I mean, when you read it, it's not sad, it's not dramatic. She still has this energy about her. It's like she was trying to find not just the peace, but just to live every moment at its fullest. Was that difficult to write? And I know that you're a cancer survivor, so how much of that also did you think back and think, well, I've thought those thoughts before?
It's funny that you say that, because I think when I was in treatment, I had breast cancer 25 years ago, and I'm very involved in a breast cancer center near me. And I just, like, I'm in awe of survivors. And I realize I write a lot about survivorships in many different ways. But when I wrote about Jet, her 7 days, and her 7 days are like 7 wonderful days. It's like she does everything that's the most important for her to do. And I think it was kind of, sometimes I feel like, I'm writing for myself. I'm writing because I need to know something. I need this message. And I think that was a message I was giving to myself, because I know when I was undergoing treatment for cancer, I felt that way every day. I felt like I'm going to live this day as if it's my last. And then as you get well, you kind of forget that.
Hmm.
And I remember a friend of mine who had cancer told me that he tried to have each day as if it was a whole life in one day. So to not to do, and I always forget this, to do a little bit of work, to be with people that he really cared about, to do some kind of artwork, to take a walk in nature, to have like a whole life in one day. And I think, that's almost what Jet does. Well, she takes 7 days to kind of have a whole life.
It's so beautifully written. And one of the things I find interesting is that the women that you write about are somewhat outsiders, right? They don't
Mhm.
really, I mean, the witches and people look, but yet people come to them for help. They come to them for need. Talk about sort of that, it's like that balance of you're different. We don't, we kind of shun you, but wait, but hold on a second. Can you help me with this?
That's just so true. Well, I think for me personally, I grew up in a household really of women. And my mother was a single mother at a time when I really didn't know any. This is hard to believe, but I didn't know anybody else whose parents were divorced.
Mm.
I mean, things had changed so radically. And she was definitely an outsider and kind of an outcast, not that she cared. Um, but I think a lot of us have that feeling of being an outcast in one way or another, secretly deep inside, because it's a lonely thing being a human,
Yeah.
and I think everybody feels that sometime. And I think these magic books are really about people who come together, and about friendship and sisterhood and sisters and brothers. I think that's part of the appeal, is that people really care about each other in these books, and there's this kind of sisterhood
Yeah.
going on. And I think that's true with when people think about witches and think about them as outcasts, and that women with power are often, you know, kind of looked down on, or feared, and I think, that still goes on to this day. I think that's why, women still relate to witches. Little girls still want to dress up as witches on Halloween, even though there's so many other things you could be. Um, there's, when I was growing up, you could either be a princess or a witch. That was basically it. And I know for me, I always wanted to be a witch. Always. It seemed like a much more interesting thing to be.
I would agree. They're much more interesting. How did you have such detail in a lot of magic, and I know a lot of times we think of magic as, oh, you did something, you drank a potion, you got better. Well, maybe it was an herbal tea, or maybe it was a medicated something. But how did you get interested in specifically in magic? I know you mentioned fairy tales, but then also research it and know what bits to pull to make the unbelievable believable.
Yeah. Well, it's like practical magic, and one thing that was really interesting for me was writing during the time of COVID.
Mm.
because especially when I was writing Magic Lessons, which takes place in the 17th century, that so many people at the time of the plague, so many more people survived who were treated by women healers than treated by physicians, men who were physicians, mostly because the women washed their hands, which I thought was so interesting. And throughout
Wow.
these novels, this family makes this certain kind of black soap, which I then realized was antibacterial black soap. And, just a lot of the herbal kind of remedies are now being thought of, herbs are being used
Yeah.
medicinally. And it's just, there was a lot of folk knowledge that women had, also that they were involved with birth and death. They were the midwives and they were the people that helped people to die and saw them through their deaths. I mean, that's both scary and powerful at the same time.
Is that why, do you think, doing so much research and going back, that we think about the Salem witch trials, and even in Essex County, England, we know that, is very similar, that people have always sort of feared this sort of unknown and they got labeled really fast.
So much, exactly what you're saying. And in my research, it was really interesting to me to find out that the only European countries where there weren't witchcraft trials and, this kind of witchcraft craze were places where the Inquisition was taking place, Spain and Portugal, where instead Jews were being persecuted instead of women. So I thought it was really interesting that, like, there is this need to persecute people. And actually in Magic Lessons, my character Maria becomes involved with Jews who are Marrano Jews who have to escape from Spain and Portugal. And I've written about this subject before, and I just think it's so much this feeling that as Jews there's no place in the world you can go to.
Yeah.
And I think that's why I also have the same feeling about witches, is that that they're so persecuted and there's nowhere to go to.
Interesting. And with sort of this, like, the idea of the mystical, and you think about, even in the Jewish tradition, there's always something Kabbalah. There's sort of a mysticism, but then your character, the Reverend, I found a very interesting character,
Oh,
because when you think about magic and religion, it's that mysticism, but yet they clash,
yes.
and your characters clashed. Talk about that whole. I mean, I found that fascinating.
Yeah, he was really a surprise to me because he comes from this tradition of a Puritan tradition, a New England Puritan traditional that's very anti-female and very well, everyone's an outsider, and feel that women were kind of the creators of original sin, like Eve. And he's very against the Owens women and very against Jet Owens, who's involved with his son, and his son dies in an earlier book. And weirdly enough, they're able to forgive each other and to become very involved with each other. They're almost become like family.
Mhm.
And for me, that was really a surprise that he became somebody who could be open to someone who was different, that he really changed. And it was really through his loss that he changed. Sometimes that happens. You don't really stop and look around until some tragedy befalls you, and then you say, wait, stop, I have to think this over.
It definitely mirrors real life, what's happening now. I mean, we are, very polarized in some ways. And, with the coronavirus and things, it has sometimes brought people together, but brought them apart. So I almost feel like it was a little wishful thinking to use them as a model.
Yes, yeah, I think it was. I think, like I said, I think sometimes, I'm much more positive as a writer than I am as a person. So I think I'm writing to let myself know certain things, that certain things are possible, that it's possible to have love in this world and to have hope in this world. So I think you're 100% right.
And Magic Lessons and the Book of Magic, you wrote both during COVID quarantine,
Yeah.
yes? So did your writing process change because we were in lockdown? Was it easier to write? Were you able to write two books consecutively, especially when they were pretty much the same, in the same genre, the same topic, the same family?
Yeah, I have found myself writing much more
Mhm.
because for me, always writing has been an escape, just always. And so, in these times, I have really felt the need to escape. And in Book of Magic, they travel all over. They go to my favorite places. They go to Paris, they go to London, they go to the countryside in England. I just feel like, I was here trapped, but they were able to travel to all these
Yeah.
wonderful places.
Oh yeah, I get it, and I felt like we felt as readers going with you, so it was nice. It was a great escape. I want to go back. Your first novel you wrote, you were 21 years old.
Yeah.
Um, Talk a little bit about. I mean, how most people. I mean, you have all these ideas, but the fact that you were published at 21 and then it just your career took off. Is it something that you always knew you wanted to do? I mean, or how did you? I mean, just to put it down at 21 and be such an accomplished author so young.
Well, I never thought I'd be published, and I never thought somebody like me could be a writer. I mean, the one thing that kind of gave me hope that maybe I could be a writer was reading the Diary of a Young Girl, Diary of Anne Frank, when I was young, because that was the only young Jewish woman girl's voice that I read. We read all men at that time, and so I never really thought I'd be able to be a writer, but I had gone out to California to go to school, and I had a great mentor who completely changed my life. And he sent one of my stories to a little magazine that published it in New York City, and I got a letter from a very famous editor saying, "Do you have a novel?" And I wrote back saying, "I do," and I started writing the novel that day really fast because I thought no one is ever going to ask me this again. He just opened the door. I either walk through it or I don't walk through it. And I just thought, I'm just doing it. And so in 6 months, I wrote really fast. I mean, I was in graduate school. I was working in a department store. I was doing a million things, but then I also wrote this novel, which wasn't very good. And he was great. His name was Ted Solitaire. He worked with me for about a year, and I rewrote it. I didn't even know people rewrote. I thought you just write it down and that's it. Um, and he didn't take the book, but he sent me to my agent, and she was my agent until she passed away, and she sold the book, which was, I mean, I just never expected any of it at all.
That's amazing. And as far as your writing process, I mean, how long does it take you to write? I mean, obviously during, like you said, quarantine, there was just more it came, but you know,
Yeah.
30 books is a lot over that. Is it once a year? And when you sit down, do you just write every day and make yourself write, or do you just when you feel like it?
It kind of depends on the book. When I did The Dove Keepers, it took me 5 years. That was just a huge book for me and a huge amount of research. I knew nothing about anything. I just had to do a huge amount of research. But usually it takes about a year. I think for me, I was a very addictive reader. And, I was the girl who had a book. I went to the movie theater, I had a book with me. I always had a book with me. And I think I kind of had switched into being very addicted to writing, because it's so similar. Only for me, it gives me more of an escape, more, to write than to read. So I think, COVID in a way was great for my writing because I did so much of it. But I think, I kind of miss the world.
Yeah. I hear you on that. That's why we all then turn to Netflix just to see other people, I
Yes,
think, a little bit.
true.
Um, you were also a screenwriter.
Yeah.
How is that different from being a novel writer to you?
Well, one thing is, I wrote so many screenplays and nothing ever happened with them. I mean, I got paid and it was really interesting and I worked with really interesting people, but so many just never got made. They just, it just took so long and they just never got made. And also, the writer just is replaceable. I worked on things where I came in after I was the second writer, or I was the writer and then somebody else took over. So, there can be many writers in a project. And one of the great things is that so many people are involved and it's so collaborative. But one of the great things about writing a novel is that it is yours. It belongs to, it's just yours. And so they're just very different procedures of ways of getting to something. And it's just a very, very different to write a novel.
But then when one of those novels or some of those novels become TV series like The Dove Keepers or Practical Magic,
Yeah,
do you relinquish that or do you
I
still have
relinquished it.
you do?
I did. Yeah, I did.
So
Because
you don't
I thought it was better for me to, a film or TV show is such a different creature than a book. And I just thought it's better for me to step away because it's going to belong to the director and the producer and the actors. It's going to be theirs. And that's just the truth of it. And I just could, for certain projects, I can do that. But for certain projects, I just didn't think it would be best for me to do that.
When you write, do you visualize who they are, or maybe say, "Oh, this person is," I mean, did you say, "Oh, Nicole Kidman, this character," Sandra, so when you're writing, you see, "Oh, Vincent, older Vincent is, you know, Alec Baldwin," or something, do you see
Yeah.
that in your brain when you're writing,
No,
or
not at all. I mean, I never see my characters, even though I think the movie of Practical Magic was great and the casting was amazing and astounding. When I'm writing, I'm more inside of them. So I see them from the inside. I don't really see them as actors. I don't even see them physically. I more kind of experience being them.
I wanna go back to The Dove Keepers.
Yeah.
How did that, I mean, it's absolutely one of my favorite books. I
Thank
fell in
you.
love with those strong women. I love, the whole topic, the Masad. How did you sort of, what drew you to that?
You know what really drew me to that is I was visiting my family in Israel, and my son was an archaeologist, and we decided we would meet at Masada, and I had never been there, and I thought it was I didn't expect to have the experience that I did. I felt it was such a spiritual experience for me, who's not a particularly spiritual person. And then as I was walking, I saw a sign that there had been survivors.
Mm.
And that just stopped me in my tracks because, as I said before, I'm really interested in survivors. I've written a book about the Holocaust, I've written about breast cancer. I'm so interested in how people manage to survive great tragedy and trauma. And as soon as I saw there had been survivors, I thought, and the survivors had been women and children, I thought, there's a novel. This is a novel. And just, I completely stupidly and bravely, I just started writing it, not realizing how much work it would be and how much I would have to learn. I had a lot of help, and I talked to experts who were very helpful, but after I wrote the book, because I wanted to kind of get the feeling of it. And one of the great things for me is when I went back to Masada, I think it was about 3 years ago, 4 years ago, the director gave me kind of a private tour, and he said something to me which made me feel great, which was that he'd never really thought about the women and the children there until he read my book, which made me feel like that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to give these people a voice.
Yes, and women. And all of your books, our book club, my book club reads every single one of your book. And I think,
Thank
we
you.
always vote. And the year Story Sisters came out, everybody went wild. That was so many people's favorite. And
Thank
I
you.
mean, it's just over and over these great books that support women, but you do it in such a different way, very much like the book. You write a book about the Holocaust, but yet there's a lot of magic and a little bit of escapism and mysticism. How are you able to put that together and not make it, seem like, oh my gosh, this is the Holocaust we're talking about?
Yeah. Well, that book was really funny because that book, I, I wrote that book because this woman was waiting for me in a parking lot in the library after I gave her reading. And she said to me, "You have to write the story of my life." And I said, I really don't do that. She said, "No, you have to." I was a hidden child during the war in France, and I had never heard of that. I mean, I knew nothing about this. And I said, I really can't. It doesn't sound like it's my story. But I kept thinking about her over the years. And then in 2016, I was really depressed, and I actually felt like I really want to meet Holocaust survivors. I don't know if it's my story to write, but I really want to meet with them. And I was so lucky, through a friend, through Facing History and Ourselves, I met Holocaust survivors who many of whom become friends, who were children and now are in their 80s and 90s. And then I went to France. And when I talked to them, I felt so connected to them. I felt almost as if they were my parents. And then I felt like I would be able to write the book. But what happened is so horrifying that to write it as realistic fiction, it almost feels like it's unbelievable
Yeah.
because it was so horrifying. So I felt like I had to tell it another way, almost like it was a very dark fairy tale to get, because I do feel like fairy tales are very dark very often. And
Yeah.
they're a lot about abandoned children. I mean,
Mm.
that's what fairy tales kind of tend to focus on. And so I wanted to write about abandoned children as if they were in a very dark fairy tale.
Interesting. And, I think I read somewhere that you have a magic library. Is that correct?
Yeah, I do. I
What
do.
is what is that? Can you explain it to
I've
us?
just been collecting
Yeah.
magic books for years and years, and now I just have so many of them. I don't know, that I feel kind of like surrounded by them. And, if I need information, it's
Mhm.
kind of here. I have it.
Do you look, we talked earlier just about religion and mysticism and things like, spirituality. Do you feel that there's a lot of, books in something like that, like Kabbalah, for instance, in sort of that mysticism magic where it's not necessarily herbal healing, potions, curses, things, but that there is something tied to religion. Is that something that is sort of workable, or is that something that's really, I mean, like we talked about the Reverend and Jet, they, it's like oil and water what their belief systems are, but yet it worked out.
Yeah. For me, I'm interested in all different forms of magic. And I was really surprised, especially when I was writing The Dove Keepers, that when I went back and read about that time period, that that religion and magic were kind of woven together. And then
Yeah.
it was kind of like parted somehow for, to be more rational or something like that. And there were a lot, just like there were more women involved, and there were, so, I just feel like, um, I'm interested in all kinds of magic and the practice of all kinds of magic. Do I kind of understand it? Not exactly. I think that's why I'm always interested in it, because it's always interesting to me. And I never quite get to the heart of it because it's hard to, it's very difficult and to understand that. And especially
Yeah.
Kabbalah, which I think I
Yeah.
that is really difficult to understand for
Yeah.
me.
Yeah, for me too. I've been trying. I have all my books, I have everything, but it is and also in the religion, they say that it's a certain level you get to understand that and even study it in some of the very religious sects.
Yeah.
Um, when you write a book, do you and they come to you and say, "Hey, we'd like to make this into a TV series or a movie." Are there some books where you just say, "No, this is not, I want to leave it as a novel," or is it something that you welcome the opportunity to sort of see it come to life and maybe change a little bit with a different perspective?
I think even though you don't have any control over it, once you sell it to someone else and it becomes their baby, I'm always interested in it because it's, the idea that you're alone in a room just
Mm,
with a computer, just with words, and you create this world, and then it becomes a movie with hundreds of people involved.
yeah.
It's really fascinating to see. And I know that when Practical Magic was being made, and I went to the set, even though I'm a writer, the person that I felt the most like was the set designer. Because when
Oh,
we went into her office and she had this board of all the different images that were inspiring her, I do that too when I write a novel. I have these kind of things that inspire me because I feel like I'm creating a world for the characters to walk into, just the way that she was.
how much was it your vision and her vision were the same, or was it completely different?
It was different, but there were kind of sparks, from the original. But it becomes somebody else's imagination.
Interesting. Okay, there's a lot of questions, so I want to
Okay,
get to some of these questions if you don't mind, because I hope
sure.
everyone gets a chance to be heard. Elaine Landoli says, "Thanks for your wonderful books. Have enjoyed so many of them over the years, starting with At Risk. I've been curious about herons in your work. When
Mm.
did you first see one, and where, and how did the heron come to be such a strong presence in some of your novels?"
Well, thank you for that comment. Herons are in a lot of my novels. I'm not exactly sure when it began, but I know that I had a sister-in-law who died very young, and when she was ill, she had kind of this fixation about herons, and we would go down to the Cape to look for them and find them. And then I'll just tell you the story. And then when she was buried, there was a heron in the tree right above us in the
Oh.
in the cemetery. And then a year later, when we went back, when we put up the headstone, the heron flew over again. And it was the idea that that it was a single heron. Usually you see them in pairs.
Hmm.
And that it just has that kind of image has just stayed with me. And the heron just has appeared in just so many of my books.
Do you believe that the universe gives us these signs, gives us these guidance in some ways, in that, when people die, we talk about spirit guides, things like that. I mean, do you believe in some of that? And is that what we see spill over into some of your novels?
I don't think I believe it, but I think I feel like I believe it. Do you know what I mean? Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think you do too, because it comes out in your work. When I read
I,
it,
I,
I
I
see
definitely
it.
feel it.
I
When that
feel it.
happened during her funeral, that seemed like a message.
Yeah, absolutely. Here's a message, a question, sorry, from Dawn. I love the fact that I can see the research in the books. Any plans to publish a bibliography of your magic library books? I'd like to read more about herbalism, magic, and history you used.
Oh, I haven't thought of that. That's kind of a good idea. But yeah, I haven't done that. Yeah. I mean,
Well, there you go.
there's just so many books. There's so many books that are terrific. I think if you just kind of walk into a bookstore, that's what I really love to do the most, is just find those books. It's like it's the same thing that when you walk into a library, it's just kind of like finding these secret books that no one tells you about. You just find them and fall in love with them.
Deanna Profis asks, Alice, the last time you were at the MJCCA, we sat outside and knit together on a beautiful
Oh my
fall
gosh, yes, you
day.
did.
Besides writing your amazing books during COVID, did you knit a lot too? And she says, your books are amazing. But what did you do to occupy
You
yourself when you weren't writing?
it's so funny. I was just talking about this with a friend today, is that I haven't knit at all during COVID. I have the yarn, and I'm and a lot of my friends I've been seeing wearing my knitted pieces recently, but I have not knit at all during COVID, and I'm not exactly sure why that is.
I love it. Well, I
Yeah,
didn't know Deanna, I didn't know that she actually knit. So now
yeah,
Dina rather, I didn't know she knit. So that now I'm going to be looking for knit things in the
we knit
mail.
together. Yeah,
I know. I
I
love
remember
Dina.
that.
Dina Prophes is one of my favorites. Okay. So, any movie, TV options for the other books? It would be cool to see something in chronological order.
Thank you. Yes, the producer of Practical Magic has optioned Rules of Magic and Magic Lessons,
Wow.
and hopefully it's going to be a kind of multi-generational series. And The World That We Knew is also, she also has that, and we're working on trying to make that into a series.
And let me ask you, but like we talked about which order to read it, would a series start in the beginning and do chronologically, or would you jump around a little bit? Sometimes.
That's kind of up to the creator of the series, but I think they'd probably jump around.
Very cool. I would like that too. I
That's
think
what I
those
would
little
do.
surprises, yeah.
Right.
Question here: what happens if you get stuck in the plot? Do you ever get stuck in a plot?
Stuck in a plot. Not so not so much. I mean, I do a lot of revision and things change a lot. But I don't think of it in terms of being stuck in the plot. I think of it more in terms like it's just not working the way it's supposed to. And there may be times where like I get rid of 100 pages and I think, after I think the book is done and have to rewrite it. But I don't think of it as being stuck in the plot. I just think it just didn't go to the right direction.
Yeah. And we knew we were going to get this question, and I love it. Alicia G says, one of the fun random things with any Zoom is when pets join in. So, can
Oh,
you introduce your sleepy friend?
she's sleepy. I'm so glad she's sleepy. That's Shelby. She's a Polish sheepdog, and she's being really good because usually she has like some squeaky stuffed animal that she's squeaking during a Zoom. So I'm really glad she's asleep. I don't know why she's so tired today.
The eagle eye person who says, is that a
Yeah,
pillow or a
there she
dog? I
is.
like that.
I'm not waking
um,
her up.
Eileen Grayev says, thank you for your support of libraries and librarians. They saved me as a child. My dad was a terrible, scary man. Books showed me that the world can be different. I was a school librarian for 35
Oh my
years.
gosh.
That's
That's
amazing.
awesome. That is really awesome.
And
My school librarian was the first person who kind of opened the world for me. Her name was Mrs. Inkin, and school librarians just like changed so many people's lives. I'm not even sure they're aware of it,
mhm.
because people don't come back 30 years later to say thank you so much for, opening the door for me. But thank you very much for doing that, for being a school librarian.
And for the younger generation, I mean, we are so addicted to our phones, our, Netflix, things like that. How
Yeah.
do people, parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, sort of spark that desire to read? Because, a lot of stuff is being made up for TV, and it's like, well, I don't have to read that. I can just watch it. But so how do we get that next generation excited about reading like we
Yeah.
all were going to libraries,
Yeah,
which very
I
few
think
exist.
I really think kids are still excited about reading, and I'm always amazed at how much reading they do, especially teenagers, because they have. You're right, they have so many other options that we didn't have, but they're still into reading. Like nothing is the same. Nothing is as personal and as intimate as a book.
Yeah.
And I'm involved with the college that I went to, Adelphi University, and every summer we have a week long workshop for juniors in high school, and it's exactly the thing that I wish it had existed when I was a kid.
Hmm.
And they are all big readers, and they all want to write. And I think kids are writing and reading, more than ever. But I also think if you have books in the house
Yeah.
and you act like you don't want them to read them, that's the book. I remember like taking the books from my mother's bookshelf that I thought she didn't want me to read. Those are the
Exactly.
books I always wanted to read.
That's a good way to do it. Um, Here's a question. I sometimes use reference photos for buildings or settings to write off of. Is this what you meant by things that inspire you?
Yes, definitely. I mean, for me, it can be something different. Like I can just for instance, I wrote a book called The Marriage of Opposites, and the reason I wrote that book is about Pizarro's mother and his family. I went to an exhibition at a museum and was just kind of wandering around, and then I just saw that I didn't know he was Jewish. I didn't know he had been brought up in St. Thomas. So it's just kind of, for me, a lot of times it's about traveling and about going someplace. Like I went to Masada, that just kind of sparks something for me. But people have it in all different ways. It could be through art, it could be through looking at pictures, it could be a million different ways of finding something.
It's the escapism of it, like you mentioned. It's getting away somewhere we may not get to St. Thomas, but you can take us there in a book.
Yeah, exactly.
Question here is how do you deal with the dark parts in fiction when they're based on fact? How do you balance the way they make readers feel?
Well, I think that was for me a big issue in the world that we knew about the Holocaust, because it's a book about extreme brutality and evil, but it's also a book about hope. And I don't think I could just have written it if it was just about evil.
Mhm.
I think I just couldn't do that. I couldn't get up every day and write that. So, for me, I'm looking for hope in books. I'm looking for answers in books. And so I think that's the way I balanced it.
The books, do you obviously, I would assume you read a lot. Are there favorite books right now that you're reading? Anything that, now that everyone's whipped through this or will whip, they say, what's next? What can you recommend? What are you
Well, I
reading
can
now?
recommend things, but something terrible is that I really don't read that much because I'm writing all the time, and I don't want
Mm,
to read other novels while I'm writing a novel because I don't want to get someone else's voice or
huh.
tone or anything in my head. But I did read two books that I really loved recently. One was The Midnight Library by Matt Haig, which I thought was such a wonderful book, and an especially wonderful book for this time for
Mhm.
COVID. And the other book that I read was Elizabeth Strout's Oh William. I love her writing. And, I loved Lucy Barton and I loved Olive Kittredge. And I just think she's an amazing, amazing writer with an incredible voice. So I love that book as well.
I love that. Here's a question. When did you know you wanted to be a writer?
I think I started out knowing that I wanted to be a reader. And I think it's a very small step from being a reader to being a writer. And so I think I was a secret writer for a long time as a child. And then I was in high school. I think I was maybe 15 or something. And I wrote a horrible story and for some reason sent it to Esquire magazine, a magazine I had never actually read, but had heard about. And I got a personal note back from someone. And that was really shocking to me. And that really kind of changed everything for me. I don't know why I sent it in. I never thought anybody would respond to it. But the person wrote to me and said, when you stop fooling around with this kid stuff, try us again. I still have that note. And I thought, I am a kid. I didn't use any capital letters. And I'm afraid to try you again, but you actually think I'm a writer, which really shocked me. And I think
Wow.
things for me.
And you've written kids books.
Yeah.
What was the, I mean, obviously you loved fairy tales, you said growing up. Is that why you wanted to do sort of that, and write for kids to get them involved in reading?
I did. I wanted to write for kids, and I've also written some young adult books because I just feel like those books are so important. They make such a huge difference what you read when you're young. And so I think I wanted to have that kind of involvement.
Yeah. Here's a comment. So love learning about this is from Don Bear Ventura. So love learning about Pissarro. He has done a doppelganger painting of me. So it was so strange to learn he was Jewish. He's been weirdly spiritual, uncanny as an experience for me. So she must look like one of his paintings.
That's so interesting. Yeah, I mean, I had no idea. Yeah.
No, go ahead. I was
Oh
going to say
no,
that
I
sounds
had
like
no
it could
idea
be
he
a
was
book.
Jewish. Yeah, I had no idea he was Jewish. I had no idea, and the other thing that I saw when I went to this exhibition, it was at a college in Western Massachusetts, and I saw that okay, he's Jewish, he's from St. Thomas, but also that his mother created a great scandal. So I was immediately interested in who his mother was. And I just feel that I was so lucky to find her as a character. I just loved her. And then I heard later on from people who had known the family and who'd been involved with the family, and said, "Oh my God, everybody hated Rachel. Everybody hated her." I'm like, "Oh, really? I loved her." So I feel
It's
like
all
I
perspective.
gave her a different voice.
It's all perspective. When you're writing characters and their interactions, like Jed and Franny or Sally and Kylie, especially in this book, how do you sort of work out those conversations? Do you have them in your head first, or is it something that you just start the conversation and it flows, on the page?
I just start the conversation. And then of course, I tend to at some point, read the book aloud, while I'm going over it to
Hmm.
see if it feels like it's real conversation. If it feels like it's hard to say or it's uncomfortable to say, if it feels like, then, I change it.
Here's a question. Do you use any software to organize? How do you organize your research to pull up the quotes and info you need to build scenes in fiction?
I'm very messy. So like, yes, I put things, I pull up the quotes, I pull up everything, and then I can't find it again. But I do, I mean, I do things, kind of, I'm more of a magic marker kind of, kind of a researcher.
And now that this is the fourth and final in the Magic series, I mean, will these? How long do characters stay with you? You hear about actors who they live the role they're in, and it takes them a long time to sort of shed that. Do you ever lose that character, or is it something that just sort of fades like an old friend?
Yeah, it's funny. When I'm done, I'm usually already working on another book.
Mm,
So, in a way, I don't even remember the book in some ways.
wow.
For this, it's a little bit different. It's a little bit
Yeah.
harder because I've been working with these characters and on kind of a bigger canvas. So it's harder for me to say goodbye to them. But usually, I'm working on something else. I'm already involved in something else.
How did you know, and when did you know this was going to be the Book of Magic was going to be the last of the series?
I don't know. I think before I started it, I felt like the reason I wanted to write this fourth book was to kind of have closure, for me and for the characters and for readers. So I think it was just before I started writing it.
I'm sorry, Miri wants to know, are your character traits based on a compilation of people you've met?
A compilation of people I've met? Not at all. No, you know what I think it's like? For me, it's more like they say that in a dream, you're every character, including the cat and the dog. I feel like, they're all sort of me. I'm not basing things on people that I know or anything like that, or conversations I've overheard. I'm not that interested in reality. For me, it's more like a dream process.
How do you, though, make the characters so full? Because these characters are so, I mean, they're realistic. Like, I feel like I have friends who have daughters who are Kylie. I know Sally. I have friends who are Sally. How do you create these characters that are so, just rich?
Well, it's so interesting because I think when Practical Magic first came out, people felt like they were either like Jillian or like Sally. It was like, they were character, they felt for them, they felt like them. I don't know how to describe what that is, or, I don't understand how to do that. I don't know how you do that. I don't know. I think it has a lot to do with rewriting or just the original imagining of it, but I really can't tell you. For me, that's the magic of it. I don't know what the answer is.
You're working on something now?
Yeah.
Now that you finished already? You don't give yourself a break?
No,
Can
especially
you
during COVID. What would I do with the break? I have nothing to do.
knit? You could knit.
Yes, that's true. You're right. You're right.
What can you tell us what you're working on or give us a little preview sneak
Yes,
peek?
I'm working on a book actually about Vashti and Esther. It takes place, you know, during ancient times, and it's the biblical story. But I want to try to get to, who these women, ancient women were, and try to kind of give them a voice in a time when it was really not a great time to be a woman.
Yeah.
So that's what I've been working on.
Is it, you jump around, you've done, you went back to the 1700s, you went, to the Holocaust, you're doing this. Is there, is it difficult to jump around and to just really get into something? It seems it would be a lot of research and just a lot of, all in to understand what it was like then and to be able to
Yeah.
create these characters. How long does it take you to research all of that and then say, okay, I'm ready to start writing, or do you do it simultaneously?
I do it simultaneously, really, because I've been working on this book for several years about Vashti. So I've just done research, kind of throughout the years, and started writing it a couple of years ago, and then put it aside, and then went back to it. So I can't really say, how long it takes to write the book.
And I want to jump to your you give back so much. And as you mentioned, you're a breast cancer survivor. Talk a little bit about what you do, because you're so active in helping other women and reaching out to other women. Can you tell us a little bit about it and how we can help support you?
Thank you so much. Well, every year I have a fundraiser for Mount Auburn Hospital. There's the Hoffman Breast Center is there. When I was diagnosed with cancer, they didn't have a breast center, and it's a Harvard teaching hospital. It's a great small hospital, and now there's a breast center. And they don't turn anyone away.
Mm.
No matter who you are, no matter what your insurance situation is, and it's an incredible place. And I'm just really proud to be associated with it. And every year, this year, we're going to do it on June 8th. We're going to do it virtually. Last year, we had so many amazing people. I can't even remember. Amy Tan, Susan Orlean. Um, uh, we had so many people. Anne Leary. Just so many people throughout the years have been so generous. So many writers will come and talk, and we've raised a couple of $1 million and built this great breast center. So I'm really feel grateful to be able to do something, and to give something back.
Can we join it virtually from wherever we are, from here in Atlanta or
Yes,
Miami? Can
from
we?
anywhere, and it will be on my, I'll be posting about it, and it'll be on my website, and I'll be posting about it on Facebook and Instagram, so you can hear all about it. I'd love for people to come.
Fantastic. And on your way, do people email you? Are you able to respond personally, or how do you interact with your readers?
I try to as much as I can. Um, you know, I have a lot of social media, and I try to respond as much as I can. And in some cases, I've become really good friends with certain people and have known them for years and years. And there's a really there's a wonderful writer who I met uh, when she was a graduate student, and we wrote to each other for 10 years. I think it was about
Wow.
10 years. And she had a novel published, and it was the #1 novel in Australia. And, then we met in New York. But, it's hard to write back to everybody, but I do read everything. I mean, I do see everything.
Fantastic. Here's a question. Julie says, I love The Marriage of Opposites. Which other books do you have Jewish characters? Well, we know The Dove Keepers.
Dove
And,
Keepers, The World
right?
That We Knew.
Yeah.
Oh, in Magic Lessons, there are Jewish characters. Um, I also wrote a book for young adults called Incantation about the Inquisition.
Hmm.
Um, so, oh, and there's something called the Museum of Extraordinary Things, which
Oh,
takes
yeah.
place in New York City in 1911, and has to do with the Triangle Factory fire and the rise of the unions in New York.
The diversity of your books, it's, sometimes you get to a writer who has the same genre over and over, we still enjoy it, but it's just mind-blowing to me that you just have touched the entire world, and each one is better than the next.
Oh, thank you so much for
Um,
saying that. And I do try to write back to people on social media as best I can.
Great. And Kenda Ward says, please tell us again the two books you read recently.
Oh, okay. One is called Oh William by Elizabeth Strout, and the other one is called The Midnight Library by Matt Haig.
Yeah,
And they're
fantastic
both
books.
terrific.
Wonderful. Well, I know we're out of time. I could talk to you forever because
I could talk to you forever.
well, let's do this again, but how about in person next time?
All right. Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you, you as well. And thank you so much. The Book of Magic is just, I mean, it's beautiful. I'm happy for you that you were able to do a final book, but I'm sad for us because we're gonna miss these people. So again, I might keep my eye out for one or two characters. I'm just saying. Thank you so much. And thank you everybody for joining us for our very special book festival in your living room. And I want to let everyone know, and Alice, if you're around, we've got ESPN's Ivan Maisel and humorists Wayne Fetterman and Annabelle Gurwitch, who's hysterical all the time. So we have more of these coming up. Just check your local JCC website. They have the up-to-date schedules there. Again, you are just, thank you for being you. Thank you for all the gifts you give us all the time.
Thank you
We
so much for
appreciate
having me.
you.
Thank
And
you.
everybody have a great night. Stay happy, stay safe, and stay tuned. We'll see you next time.
Take care.
Bye.